Today's Tuesday, and you know what that means? That means it's time for another Sunday special, because I'm never on time, it seems. So today, as it turns out, is the feast of St Justin Martyr and philosopher. Justin lived in the middle of the 2nd century and was, as you may guess, martyred. So he lives in the 150s. He has an interesting journey from paganism through to Christianity, and he himself becomes resident in the city of Rome, which is where he meets his martyrdom. He's really interesting for a lot of things, not least of which is his description of early Christian worship in the city of Rome, as well as his doctrine of the Holy Eucharist and the real presence. But I'm just going to stick to one thing today, because Sunday specials aren't simply about ecclesiastical history, as awesome and exciting as that is, but about ideas and the impact that ideas can have on us and our reading of texts. So, I want to talk about the concept of the Logos Spermatikos, or the seminal word, or maybe the enseeded word, or the word enseed, the sown word. Logos. We know it, we're just going to say Logos Spermatikos. So, that term is a Stoic term, as it turns out. It is not original to Christianity. And so Justin here is in fact appropriating. He has been through the philosophical schools according to his own personal biography, and he is appropriating unto himself for the use in Christian philosophy the things from pagan philosophy that he finds useful. This is normal. This is what all Christian rhetoricians, theologians, and philosophers have done since St. Paul. So, and logos here is not simply word, right? That's sort of how we might translate it. But it can be something much broader than simply the word in terms of the spoken utterance of a signum that represents a race, if we're thinking in terms of those Augustinian thoughts that I had a couple videos ago. And we're looking at the word in its biggest, broadest sense. Word as reason, word as rationality, word as the root of logic, word as the root of all of the ologies, theology, archaeology, phrenology, psychology. And so it can also mean a broad range of things. And so the idea of the Logos Spermatikos, just independent of Justin, is that there is an ordering principle that exists within the universe, and it is enseeded or sown in all of the things. And so what Justin does is he takes this Logos and the Logos, the God word from John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so we see these two things coming together. And of course, the God word of John 1 became incarnate as Jesus Christ. And so what it means is that Jesus himself is the governing rational principle of the entire universe. He provides the structure of everything. And in some way, you can see that sort of he exists as a seed within all humans, ready to blossom forth as perhaps the tree of life in your own heart. Not that Justin goes there. And thus, at some level, whenever a person reasons rightly or thinks truly, that person is interacting with the Logos Spermatikos. So, now this sort of idea, of course, could easily get lost, especially today. You think of those who promote some sort of a Christ consciousness, where the actual discrete individual personhood of Jesus the Christ gets lost in terms of there being some sort of cosmic thing that you can participate in yourself. The personal reality of Jesus, the one and only Christ, the personal reality of the Logos, who is also God the Son, is not lost in Justin. Indeed, he's always driving through. If you do a word search for the word word through the English translation of his works, you will find that he is constantly referring back to the scriptures, back to the Word as the only begotten Son of God, back to the incarnation of the Word as Jesus Christ in all of these ways. And so then the Word doesn't get lost in some sort of vague, impersonal, cosmic reality. So let's see a few things that Justin himself has to say. So one of his works is a text called The Dialogue with Trypho, who is Jewish, and in it he sets out in this text to prove to Trypho the truth of the Christian gospel and of Jesus as the Messiah. In that text, Justin says that the Word is indivisible and inseparable from the Father, just as they say the light of the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun in the heavens. as when it sinks, the light sinks along with it. So the Father, when he chooses, say they, causes his power to spring forth, and when he chooses, he makes it return to himself. And that this power, which the prophetic word calls God, is not numbered as different in name only, like the light of the sun, but is indeed something numerically distinct, I have discussed briefly in what has gone before, when I asserted that this power was begotten from the Father, by his power and will, but not by abscission, so not as being cut away from God the Father, as if the essence of the Father were divided. I would like to say divine simplicity, definitely a thing that Justin would believe in, and definitely something that he is not interested in. So the essence of the Father is not divided, as all other things partitioned and divided are not the same after as before they were divided. And for the sake of example, I took the cases of fire kindled from a fire, which we see to be distinct from it, and yet that from which many can be kindled is by no means made less, but remains the same. Interesting here is the fact that a lot of these analogies, modified slightly, persist throughout Trinitarian theology and are the same sorts of analogies that you will find people making in the 4th century. So 200 years after this, trying to argue for the fact that the Son is of the same essence as the Father. So that's interesting. Of course, these aren't arguments for him being co-eternal, but it's interesting to see that the first bubblings of Trinitarian thought are going on here in terms of how do we think about who is the Word. Let's move on. Chapter 5 of the First Apology. For not only among the Greeks did reason, or logos, prevail to condemn these things through Socrates, but also among the barbarians were they condemned by reason, or condemned by the word, by the Logos himself, who took shape and became man and was called Jesus Christ. And in obedience to him, we not only deny that they who did such things as these are gods, he's talking about the mythological gods of the Greek and Roman world, who, if you read Ovid, got up to all sorts of no good. Or if you read Apollodorus' library, if you want a quick run through of what Greek myths are. But assert that they are wicked and impious demons, whose actions will not bear comparison with those even of men desirous of virtue. So here we see the use of Logos. This isn't necessarily use of the Logos Spermatikos, but actually it is, isn't it? It's the use of Christ as the Logos. The Greeks used reason to actually condemn the ill actions of the gods of mythology through the person and action and work, you might say, the philosophy of Socrates and Plato. But even barbarians were using reason. And it turns out if you're doing that sort of thing, if you're condemning false gods and you're using reason and rationality to do that, that reason and rationality you're using is actually person who became incarnate as Jesus Christ. That's what's going on here, and that's pretty cool. Have to say, I like Justin right here. And then in chapter 12 of the first dialogue again, just so you might realize, a lot of this video is just me reading Justin and then talking about what he's saying. He says, "And that you will not succeed is declared by the Word, than whom after God begot him, we know there is no ruler more kingly and just." So he's basically, you might, from a later pro-Nicene perspective, think that Justin is being a little bit subordinationist here, but people are still working out how do you talk about the God word. For as all shrink from succeeding to the poverty or sufferings or obscurity of their fathers, so whatever the word forbids us to choose, the sensible man will not choose. So he's arguing here that whatever reason, whatever Logos tells us not to do, us Christians, any right-thinking man of any religion would likewise do the same. That all these things should come to pass, I say, our teacher foretold. He who is both Son and Apostle of God, the Father of all, and the ruler, Jesus Christ, from whom also we have the name of Christians, right? So once again, this is just, I like this example to drive home the fact that Justin is always talking about the Word in personal terms. Jesus Christ is the Word. We're not getting lost in any sorts of modern New Age-ish Christ consciousness. When we become more assured of all the things he taught us, since whatever he beforehand foretold should come to pass, is seen, in fact, coming to pass. And this is the work of God, to tell of a thing before it happens, and as it was foretold, so to show it happening. It were possible to pause here and add no more, reckoning that we demand what is just and true, But because we are well aware that it is not easy suddenly to change a mind possessed by ignorance, we intend to add a few things for the sake of persuading those who love the truth, knowing that it is not impossible to put ignorance to flight by presenting the truth. So, there we go. Just seeing the ongoing work of the God Word. And then also, I just like the fact that you can find throughout the works of the fathers, they love talking about the fact that Jesus speaks and he teaches us truth, and that utterances. So as chapter 14 of the First Apology says, brief and concise utterances fell from him, for he was no sophist. Did get Plato's enemies, but his word was the power of God. And so we see here once again that this is an allusion to 1 Corinthians, where Christ is called the wisdom of God and the power of God. So here we see that Jesus Christ's own word is so powerful because he himself is God, I suppose you would say, in a post-Nicene world, that he utters brief and concise statements. He does not teach like the scribes and Pharisees, right? He teaches with authority because he himself truly holds it as the governing principle of the universe infleshed as a human. So in chapter 46, chapter 46 is important because in it, Justin is making the argument that the people who come before Christ are somehow participants in Christ as well, to whatever extent they are actually living according to righteousness, and therefore the truth, to what extent therefore they are participating in the word. And so basically, though, this is important because it means it doesn't negate the power of the cross in saving. What a lot of the ancient Christians will have believed is that the cross saves in both directions. That the blood of Christ shed on the cross will avail for Abraham as much as it avails for you today. And so, chapter 46, he says, but lest some should, this is the full chapter all of chapter 46, but lest some should, without reason, and for the perversion of what we teach, maintain that we say that Christ was born 150 years ago under Cyrenius, and subsequently, in the time of Pontius Pilate, taught what we say he taught, and should cry out against us as though all men who were born before him were irresponsible. Let us anticipate and solve the difficulty. We have been taught that Christ is the firstborn of God, and we have declared above that he is the Word, of whom every race of men were partakers. And those who lived reasonably are Christians, even though they have been thought atheists, as among the Greeks, Socrates and Heraclitus, and men like them, and among the barbarians, Abraham and Ananias and Azarias and Misael and Elias, and many others whose actions and names we now decline to recount, because we know it would be tedious. So that even they who lived before Christ, and lived without reason, were wicked and hostile to Christ, and slew those who lived reasonably. But those who through the power of the word, Christ who through the power of this is a Victorian translation, and I have now got caught out in the middle of a video that I don't want to edit. So, bear with me. But who, through the power of the word, according to the will of God the Father and Lord of all, he was born of a virgin as man, and was named Jesus, and was crucified and died and rose again, and ascended into heaven. An intelligent man will be able to comprehend from what has already been so largely said. So, he's basically saying that Jesus Christ is the God Word, and people who are participating with righteous living, I guess you could say, and true thought before Christ are as much participants in him as everyone afterward, and they can also be held to account if we start thinking in terms of Romans 1. And we, since the proof of this subject is less needful now, will pass for the present to the proof of those things which are urgent. So much for the first apology. My main points so far have been Christ is always personal. The God Word, the Logos Spermatikos, is not a vague, impersonal thing in Justin. It is actually Jesus the Christ incarnate, dead and risen and ascended. But also, this is important, the pagans can actually share in his goodness and be Christians before Christ. Socrates is the one who's most often cited, and he points out that just as Christians are being persecuted by the Roman government, so also you see some of the wisest pagans of the past were also persecuted by their own governments, most notably Socrates. ancient Christians really loved Socrates and imagined that he that he was there, for example, when Christ descended into hell and took captivity captive and all of those things, and brought many gifts with him in his train, that among the people whose souls were saved by Christ, this is the harrowing of hell, was Socrates. That he saw Christ, he heard Christ's proclamation, and he assented to the gospel and said, this is what I was longing for all along. So moving along to the second apology, this is our final quotation of the video. He was and is the Word who is in every man, and who foretold the things that were to come to pass both through the prophets and in his own person, when he was made of like passions and taught these things. So this means that Christ is actually readily available to everyone. This isn't some sort of broad universalism, of course, because Justin at length talks about wicked people, unrighteous people, and how those people will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. But he is saying that everyone has Christ available. You need to just be ready for him. He is there, and you participate in his life the more and more you live according to reason and truth and holiness. The truly cosmic Christ, then, is the same one who was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and it is only through his incarnate death and resurrection that we are made whole, and only through that are we brought into right relationship with God. Nonetheless, because of the cosmic dimensions of who he is, Christ is available to everyone at some level, even those people who have yet to hear of Christianity, people who do not have access to Bibles or the ability to go to a church and hear a preacher preach. He is available to them, right? He was available to Abraham. Abraham is always my example for this sort of thing. How did Abraham know God without the Bible, right? God is not restricted to the Bible. The Bible simply is his primary chosen means of self-revelation to the world. He can make himself known to anyone at any time. Abraham, people like Job as well, who is himself outside of the Jewish nation, yet was righteous and knew God. People, therefore, in Justin's argument, also Socrates and Heraclitus. So he's available to everyone at some level and at hand wherever we are. But that, of course, you have to accept the gift, I suppose you could say, once you've heard of it. Anyway, that's a different theological question than this. It's related, though. So finally, salvation of, what we can say, salvation is not detached from the rest of the created order. If we start thinking about that, this is one of the exciting things if we start thinking more broadly about the idea of Christ as God, the God Word, Christ as the reason of God himself, that he is the Word and wisdom of God present at creation. This is something that Justin gets into elsewhere. I didn't do every quote available in his corpus. That Jesus Christ is the Word and wisdom of God present at creation, and then the Word and wisdom and rationality of God who sustains creation. And so creation itself, however, has been wounded according to Genesis 3. And therefore, salvation is not just a humans only club, that Jesus Christ is making all things new, right? The trees of the field clap their hands. The heavens declare the glory of God. All of these things are somehow participants in the great and glorious reason and rationality of God, who created them, sustains them, and is going to renew them. He's going to make a new heaven and a new earth, let alone new human bodies. We may be the thing that God has created these other things for at some level, but that doesn't mean that they themselves are not, therefore, part of the story of salvation. The same person, the actual person, a real person, like Jesus became flesh and blood, right? He brought up humanity into divinity. God became man so that man might become God. Now we're quoting St. Athanasius, who is riffing off Irenaeus there. So we're getting out by a few decades or centuries. But that same person is also the one who orders everything, from gravity to dragonflies emerging from their nymph carapaces, as my family, my sons, my wife, and I, and my in-laws were actually able to witness today at the swimming area at Kekabeka Falls Provincial Park, which is really cool. And so you look at that, you see these little dragonflies squirming out, or you see them sitting in the sun as they dry out, and you're like, this is amazing, this is really cool. And you know what? The God who designed that, and the God who enables that to continue to happen year after year in the life cycle of dragonflies, is the same God who took on flesh and shed his blood for you. This is part of what is really cool here. And so every time you see something like that going on, give thanks to God for Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is there present with the dragonfly. He is present in your heart. He is present in the universe. And he makes himself available to you if you would but listen, turn your hearts and minds to him, seek him where he might be found in the scriptures and in the sacraments most, of course, but in the rest of the world as well. The beauty and the glory of the incarnation are there ready for all of us at any time. I'm Matthew Hoskin. This is another Sunday special talking about Justin Martyr and the Logos Spermatikos. I wish you many blessings, and I'll see you on my next video.